The great hall of Etheria stretched for nearly a mile, its crystal ceiling showing the swirling purple nebula that surrounded the galactic capital world. And within this magnificent chamber, 100 alien kings sat trembling on their thrones. They had come from every corner of known space, these rulers of mighty empires and ancient kingdoms. And yet not one of them could stop shaking as the massive doors at the far end of the hall began to open. She was coming. King Vorthan of the Relaxed Dominion gripped the arms of his throne so hard that his four-fingered hands turned white, and beside him, Emperor Chell of the Mindori Collective had closed all 6 of his eyes in a desperate attempt to find inner peace before the terror arrived. The doors opened fully, and Princess Velith Sorn of the Cathari Empire stepped into the hall. She was tall and slender, with skin the color of pale moonlight and hair that flowed like liquid silver down her back, and her eyes burned with a cold violet fire that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone and reach directly into the soul. The moment she entered, every king in the chamber felt it. It started as a cold sensation in the chest, like ice water being poured directly into the heart, and then it spread outward through every nerve and every muscle until the entire body was frozen in absolute primal terror. This was not ordinary fear, not the kind that came from seeing a predator or facing death in battle, but something far deeper and more ancient. A fear that reached into the most primitive parts of the brain and screamed one simple message: you are prey. And the predator is here. King Vorthan let out a whimper and slid lower in his throne, trying to make himself as small as possible, while Emperor Chell began to weep silently, his tears falling from all 6 closed eyes. Princess Valith walked slowly down the center of the hall, her footsteps echoing in the terrible silence. And with each step she took, the fear grew stronger. She did not smile. She did not frown. Her face showed nothing at all. And somehow that emptiness was the most terrifying thing of all. The Conclave of Thrones had been called because of the Hollow Swarm, an ancient enemy that had awakened at the edge of the galaxy and now threatened to consume everything in its path. And the kings had gathered to form an alliance against this common foe. But how could they plan for war when they could barely breathe in her presence? Princess Valith reached the center of the hall and stopped, her violet eyes sweeping across the assembled rulers like a lighthouse beam passing over ships lost at sea. My father, the Emperor of the Cathari, sends his greetings, she said, and her voice was soft and cold, like wind blowing through a tomb. He has sent me to remind you that the Hollow Swarm cares nothing for your borders or your treaties, and that if we do not stand together, we will all fall alone. No one answered. No one could answer. The fear was too strong. King Vorthan tried to open his mouth to speak, but all that came out was a strangled gasp, and he quickly looked down at his feet in shame. Princess Velith watched him with those burning violet eyes, and for just a moment, something like sadness flickered across her face before the cold mask returned. This was her curse, the gift she had been born with and could never escape, and everywhere she went, she brought only terror. She had never known friendship, never known love, never known what it felt like to have someone look at her without wanting to run away. She was the most powerful weapon in the Cathari Empire, and she was completely alone. The great doors at the far end of the hall opened again, and every king in the chamber turned to look, grateful for any distraction from the princess and her suffocating presence. A single figure walked through the doors, a figure that looked strange and out of place among all these alien forms. He was human commander Marcus Cole of the Terran Expeditionary Fleet. Was not a large man, standing just under 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and short dark hair that was starting to show gray at the temples. And he walked with the confident stride of someone who had seen too much to be impressed by crystal halls and purple nebula. Humanity had only recently joined the galactic community, their small fleet of ships barely worth mentioning compared to the great armadas of the alien empires. And this was their first invitation to the Conclave of Thrones. Marcus had been chosen because he was considered expendable, a veteran commander with no family left and nothing to lose, sent to represent Earth at a gathering that no one expected humans to survive. As he walked down the center of the hall, he felt the princess's power wash over him like a wave. The fear hit him hard, harder than anything he had ever experienced. And for a moment, his vision went dark, and his legs threatened to give out beneath him. He felt like he was drowning in ice water, like 1,000 invisible hands were squeezing his heart. Like every nightmare he had ever had was happening at once. But Marcus Cole had felt fear before. He had felt it on Europa, when the orbital station exploded, and he watched 300 of his friends die in the vacuum of space while he floated helpless in a damaged escape pod. He had felt it on Kepler 22b, when his entire squadron was ambushed and he had to dig their graves with his bare hands in the frozen soil. He had felt it every night for the past 10 years. Waking up screaming from dreams of fire and death and loss, and he had learned something important during all those terrible nights. Fear was just information, just the body's way of saying that something mattered. It did not have to stop you. It did not have to control you. You could feel the fear and keep walking anyway. So that is exactly what Marcus did. He felt the princess's terror flooding through his mind, felt every instinct screaming at him to fall to his knees or turn and run. And he ignored all of it, kept walking, one foot in front of the other, his eyes fixed on the silver-haired woman in the center of the hall. The alien kings stared in disbelief, their mouths hanging open, their eyes wide with shock. No one had ever done this before. No one had ever been able to do this before. And yet here was this strange human creature, walking calmly through the princess's field of terror, as if it were nothing more than a light breeze. Princess Validith felt something she had never felt before. Surprised, she pushed harder with her power, sending wave after wave of pure psychological terror at the approaching human. But still he kept coming. His face was pale, and there was sweat on his forehead. So she knew he was feeling it. She knew her power was reaching him. But somehow it was not stopping him. Marcus stopped directly in front of the princess, close enough to touch her, and he looked up into those burning violet eyes. "Commander Marcus Cole, representing Earth and the Terran Expeditionary Fleet," he said, and his voice was steady even though his hands were shaking. "I apologize for being late." The traffic around the nebula was terrible. For a long moment, the princess just stared at him, and the entire hall held its breath. Then, for the first time in her adult life, Princess Valith Sorn smiled. It was a small smile, barely more than a slight curve of her pale lips, but it transformed her face from something terrifying into something almost beautiful. "You are either very brave or very stupid, human," she said. Marcus shrugged. "In my experience, there is not much difference between the two." And in that moment, in that great hall filled with trembling alien kings and swirling purple light, something changed. Neither of them knew it yet, but the galaxy would never be the same. In the weeks that followed the conclave, Princess Valith found herself doing something she had never done before. She sought out another person's company. Every day she would summon Commander Marcus Cole to her private chambers in the palace. And every day he would come without hesitation, walking through halls where servants fled at the sight of him simply because they knew where he was going. The other alien kings watched these meetings with growing suspicion, whispering among themselves in the shadowed corners of the palace. "What is she planning?" King Vorthan hissed to Emperor Chell one evening. "Why does she spend so much time with this human?" "Perhaps she is studying him," Chell replied, his 6 eyes blinking nervously. "Perhaps she wishes to learn how to overcome whatever resistance he has to her power. Or perhaps," Vorthan said slowly, "she is turning him into a weapon against us." But the truth was far simpler than any of their theories. Princess Valith was lonely, and for the first time in her life, she had found someone who could stay in the same room with her without collapsing in terror. Their first few meetings were formal and awkward, focused on discussing military strategies and fleet positions for the coming war against the Hollow Swarm. But slowly, the conversations began to change. "How do you do it?" Valeth asked one afternoon, sitting across from Marcus at a small table while servants had abandoned their posts rather than remain near the princess. "Do what?" Marcus asked, taking a sip of the strange purple tea that the Cathari seemed to favor. "Stand in my presence without falling apart like all the others." Marcus set down his cup and thought for a moment before answering. "I do fall apart," he said honestly. "Every time I am near you, I feel like I am dying, like the universe is ending, like nothing good will ever happen again." Vileth's violet eyes widened slightly. "Then why do you not show it?" "Because I have felt that way before. Many times, and I am still here," Marcus said. "After a while, you learn that feelings are not commands. You can feel afraid and still choose what to do next." The princess was quiet for a long time, her pale fingers tracing patterns on the table's surface. "Among my people, I am considered a great gift to the Empire," she finally said, "a weapon of unmatched power. A tool that can bring entire worlds to their knees without firing a single shot." "That sounds lonely." Marcus Said Valeth looked up sharply, and for just a moment, Marcus saw something vulnerable beneath the cold mask she wore. "No one has ever said that to me before," she whispered. "No one has ever been able to stay long enough to say much of anything." "I imagine." A sound escaped the princess's throat, something that might have been a laugh if she had any practice making such sounds. "When I was a child, my father tried to find companions for me," she said. "Other children from noble families who were supposed to become my friends. But they all ran away screaming within minutes of meeting me, and eventually, my father stopped trying." "That was not your fault," Marcus said. "Of course it was my fault. I am the one who makes them afraid." Marcus shook his head. "You did not choose this power. It was forced upon you. The fault belongs to those who gave up on you, instead of learning to help you." Princess Valeth stared at him as if he were speaking a foreign language. And in a way, he was, because no one had ever suggested that her isolation might not be her own fault. Their meetings continued, and with each one, the walls around the princess's heart began to crack. She told Marcus about growing up in the palace, surrounded by luxury but utterly alone, watching other children play through windows while servants carefully kept her away from everyone. Marcus told her about Earth, about humanity's long history of struggle and suffering, about the wars and plagues and disasters that had nearly wiped them out a dozen times over. "We are a stubborn species," he admitted. "Too stubborn to know when to give up. Is that why you do not fear death?" Valeth asked. "Who said I do not fear death?" Marcus laughed. "I fear it constantly. I just refuse to let that fear make my decisions for me." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Fear is not your enemy. Princess, surrender is, as long as you keep fighting. Keep moving, keep choosing, then fear cannot win." Something shifted in Veleth's expression, something that looked almost like hope, that their peaceful days of conversation could not last forever. It happened during their 7th meeting, when a servant burst into the room with panic on his face, shouting that assassins had breached the palace. Valeth rose from her chair, her power flaring outward in a wave of terror that dropped the servant unconscious immediately. But even as she prepared to defend herself, a figure appeared from the shadows behind her. The assassin was Mindari, one of Emperor Chel's people, and in his hand he held a syringe filled with glowing green liquid. Valeth recognized it instantly. It was a neural suppressant, a poison designed specifically to neutralize psychic abilities, and if it reached her bloodstream, she would become defenseless. The assassin moved with incredible speed, faster than Valeth could react, and for a moment it seemed like nothing could stop him. Then Marcus was there, he had crossed the room in a heartbeat, throwing himself between the princess and her attacker. And the syringe that was meant for Velith's neck plunged instead into Marcus's shoulder. The assassin, surprised by this interference, hesitated for just a second. And that was all the time Velith needed. She unleashed her power directly at him. A focused beam of pure terror that struck his mind like a hammer, and the assassin collapsed to the ground. His heart stopped by overwhelming fear, but Velith barely noticed her victory, because all her attention was on the human who had just saved her life. Marcus had fallen to his knees, the green poison spreading through his veins, and his face was twisted in agony. "Why did you do that?" Velith demanded, kneeling beside him, her hands hovering over his body as if she wanted to help but did not know how. "Because you are worth protecting." Marcus gasped through gritted teeth. Velith felt something crack inside her chest, something that had been frozen for so long that she had forgotten it existed. She called for healers, screaming with a voice that made the walls shake. And servants came running despite their fear, because the princess's command was absolute, as the healers worked to save Marcus's life. Velith stayed by his side, and for the first time in her memory, she realized that she was afraid, not the fear she projected onto others, not the cold terror that was her curse, but real fear, the kind that came from caring about someone else. She did not want this strange, brave human to die. She did not want to be alone again. The healers worked through the night, and Velith refused to leave, sitting in a chair beside Marcus's bed while her power flickered and pulsed with emotions. She could not name when dawn finally came and the healers announced that he would survive. Velith let out a breath she did not know she had been holding, and when Marcus opened his eyes and saw her sitting there, he smiled. "Still here?" he asked weakly. "Where else would I be?" She replied it was not a declaration of love, not yet. But it was something that Velith had never experienced before. Connection. For the first time in her life, she was not alone, and she realized that she would do anything to keep it that way, even if it meant facing her own fears, even if it meant changing everything she thought she knew about herself. The princess who made everyone afraid had finally found something she herself was afraid to lose. The coalition fleet gathered at the edge of civilized space. 1,000 warships from 100 different worlds, their hulls gleaming in the light of distant stars as they prepared to face the hollow swarm commander Marcus. Cole stood on the bridge of the Terran flagship, a vessel called the Defiant that was barely half the size of the smallest alien cruiser, and he watched through the viewport as Princess Velith's shuttle approached. She had been assigned to the fleet as a weapon, her psychic powers meant to disrupt the hollow swarm's coordination and turn their mindless unity into chaos. 3 weeks had passed since the assassination attempt. 3 weeks in which Marcus had recovered from the poison, and the bond between him and the princess had grown stronger. Now they would face the enemy together. The shuttle docked, and minutes later Velith entered the bridge, her silver hair flowing behind her and her violet eyes scanning the assembled crew. Human officers flinched when they felt her presence, their faces going pale and their hands trembling, but none of them ran. And Marcus felt a surge of pride in his people. "The fleet is ready," Admiral Karth of the Relax announced over the communication channel, his voice shaky despite his efforts to hide it. "We jumped to the swarm's location in 1 hour. 1 hour until the battle that would decide the fate of the galaxy." Marcus turned to Velith, who had come to stand beside him at the viewport. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. "I have been preparing for this my entire life," she replied. But there was uncertainty in her voice that only Marcus could hear. "That is not what I asked." Velith was silent for a moment, her eyes fixed on the stars. "I am afraid," she finally admitted. "Not of dying, but of failing. Of discovering that my power is useless and that I have nothing else to offer." Marcus reached out and took her hand, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. And Valeth did not pull away. "Whatever happens out there, you are more than just your power," he said. "I have seen it. Even if no one else has." Before she could respond, the fleet began to move. 1,000 ships jumping into hyperspace in perfect formation, heading toward their destiny. The hollow swarm was waiting for them when the fleet emerged from hyperspace. Every captain on every ship felt their blood turn cold. The swarm was vast beyond imagination, a cloud of living darkness that stretched across millions of miles, made up of billions of individual creatures that moved and flowed like a single terrible organism. The creatures themselves were nightmarish, black, twisted things with too many limbs and mouths filled with crystalline teeth, each one connected to all the others through some invisible psychic bond. They did not think. They did not feel. They simply consumed. All ships. "Begin attack pattern Alpha," Admiral Korath commanded, and the fleet surged forward. Weapons blazing Princess Valith stood in the center of the Defiance Bridge, her eyes closed, her arms raised. As she reached out with her power toward the swarm, she pushed with everything she had, sending waves of psychic terror into that vast dark cloud, trying to disrupt their coordination, trying to make them afraid. Nothing happened. The swarm creatures did not slow, did not hesitate, did not show any sign that they felt her power at all. "It is not working," Valeth cried, her eyes flying open in horror. "They have no minds that I can reach. They are empty, hollow. There is nothing there to feel fear." Across the fleet, panic began to spread. Ships that had been counting on the princess's power to protect them found themselves facing the swarm without their greatest weapon. And several alien captains immediately ordered retreat. "Hold your positions," Admiral Korath shouted, but his voice cracked with terror. And more ships began to turn away. The swarm smashed into the fleet like a wave hitting a sandcastle. Alien vessels exploded by the dozens as the creatures swarmed over their hulls, tearing through metal and flesh with equal ease. The Mindari flagship was overrun in seconds. Emperor Chell's dying scream echoing across the communication channels before being cut short. It was chaos. It was slaughter. And it seemed like all hope was lost. Then Commander Marcus Cole's voice cut through the noise. "All Terran ships. This is Commander Cole. Ignore the retreat order. We are going in. The human fleet, just 15 small ships among 1,000, broke formation and charged directly at the heart of the swarm." "What are you doing?" Admiral Korath demanded. "You will be destroyed." "Maybe," Marcus replied. "But we did not come here to run away." He switched to a different channel, one that broadcast to every ship in the coalition. "Listen to me, all of you. Every species in this fleet has something worth protecting back home. Families, friends, worlds full of people who are counting on us to keep them safe. Today, we find out what we are willing to die for." The Terran ships hit the swarm like bullets, their weapons firing constantly. Their engines pushed to maximum power. They were not trying to win. They were trying to buy time, to show the rest of the fleet that the enemy could be fought. The Defiant shook as swarm creatures latched onto its hull, and Marcus could hear the sounds of them trying to break through. "All hands, prepare to repel boarders," he shouted, drawing his sidearm. The next few minutes were hell-swarm creatures burst through the walls, and the human crew fought them in the corridors with guns and knives and bare hands, refusing to give an inch. Even as they died, Marcus himself killed 3 of the monsters before a 4th knocked him to the ground, its crystalline teeth inches from his face. Then a blast of psychic energy hit the creature, and it collapsed. Dead Valith stood over him, her face pale but determined, her power focused into a tight beam that she used like a weapon, killing swarm creatures one at a time since she could not affect them as a group. "I told you that you were more than just your power," Marcus said as she helped him up, "and you are more than just one man. Yet here you are, trying to save everyone anyway." She replied something changed in the coalition fleet as they watched the humans fight King Vorthan, who had been about to order his ships to flee. Saw the tiny Terran vessels holding the line against impossible odds. Saw humans dying by the hundreds, but never giving up. And he felt something he had not felt in a long time. Shame. All relax ships. Reverse course, he commanded. We will not let these humans die alone. One by one, the other alien ships stopped their retreat and turned back toward the battle. The swarm was still overwhelming, still vast beyond measure. But now the coalition fought with something they had not had before. Unity. They formed defensive formations around the damaged human ships. Their combined firepower creating walls of energy that the swarm creatures could not penetrate. The battle raged for hours, and losses were terrible on both sides, but slowly, impossibly. The coalition began to push back when the swarm finally retreated, pulling back into the depths of space to regroup. A ragged cheer went up from the surviving ships. They had not won, not yet. But they had proven that the swarm could be fought, and everyone in the fleet knew who to thank on the battered bridge of the Defiant. Marcus Cole sat slumped in his chair, covered in blood that was only partly his own, and Princess Valith stood beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. Your people are insane, she said softly. We prefer the term determined. Marcus replied with a weak smile, but both of them knew that this was only the beginning, and that the real battle was still to come. The War Council met 3 days after the first battle, gathering in the damaged conference room of what remained of the coalition flagship. The mood was grim despite their survival, because everyone knew the truth. They had barely held the line against a small portion of the swarm, and the main body of the enemy was still out there, waiting. Our scouts have found the source, Admiral Korath announced, his holographic display showing a massive object deep within the swarm's territory. A nexus creature at the center of everything. Something ancient and enormous that seems to be controlling all the others. The image zoomed in to show a moon-sized organism, pulsing with dark energy, surrounded by billions of swarm creatures that orbited it like worshippers around a god. If we can destroy that thing, the swarm might fall apart, King Vorthan said, but there was no hope in his voice. But our entire fleet could not fight through so many of those creatures. Then we do not bring the entire fleet, Princess Valith said. And everyone turned to look at her. She stood at the edge of the room, her violet eyes fixed on the holographic image of the Nexus creature. My power did not work on the swarm, because they have no minds of their own. They are extensions of that central being, puppets controlled by a single consciousness. So your abilities are useless against them, Admiral Korath said flatly. Against the puppets, yes, but not against the one holding the strings, Valith replied. If I can get close enough to that Nexus creature, I can reach into its mind directly, and I believe I can destroy it from within. Silence fell over the council as everyone processed what she was suggesting. You would have to travel through the heart of the swarm to reach it, King Vorthan said slowly. No fleet could protect you on such a journey, which is why I do not need a fleet, Valith said. I need a single ship, fast and quiet, something that can slip through the swarm without being noticed. She turned to look at Commander Marcus Cole, who had been standing silently in the corner. I need the Defiant. The council erupted in protests. Alien kings shouting over each other about how foolish and dangerous this plan was. But Marcus did not hear any of it, was looking at Valith, seeing the determination in her eyes. And he already knew what his answer would be. One condition, he said. Cutting through the noise, the council fell silent. I go with you. The journey to the Nexus would take 6 days, and the Defiant would need to travel without any support. Completely alone in the heart of enemy territory, most of the original crew volunteered to stay aboard. But Marcus ordered all but a skeleton crew to evacuate, keeping only those whose skills were absolutely essential. You should leave too, he told Valith the night before they departed. Standing with her on the observation deck of the Coalition flagship, "Why would I leave when this entire mission depends on me? Because there is a good chance none of us will come back. And you are too important to throw away on a desperate gamble." Valith turned to face him, her silver hair catching the starlight. "I have spent my entire life being important," she said. "Being a weapon, being a tool, being the thing that everyone fears and no one loves. But I have never been brave." She reached out and took his hand, her cool fingers intertwining with his warm ones. "You taught me that courage is not about being unafraid. It is about choosing to act despite the fear. And right now, I choose to act." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we go together." The Defiant launched at dawn, slipping away from the Coalition fleet and heading into the darkness of swarm space. For the first 2 days, they saw nothing, the void around them empty and quiet. But everyone on board knew that the silence was just an illusion. On the 3rd day, they encountered the first swarm patrol. Marcus cut the engines and let the ship drift, running on minimal power while the swarm creatures passed within miles of their hull. Everyone held their breath, and Valith pressed her power inward, trying to make herself as small and unnoticeable as possible. The patrol moved on, and the Defiant continued its journey, but their luck could not last forever. On the 4th day, a swarm creature collided with the ship by accident, its body slamming into the hull with enough force to breach the outer plating. Alarms blared as atmosphere began to vent, and Marcus scrambled to seal the breach while swarm creatures detected the disturbance and began to converge on their location. "We have to run," his first officer shouted. "No, if we power up the engines now, every creature in the sector will see us," Marcus replied, his hands flying over the controls. "We fight." The creatures breached the hull in 3 places, and the crew of the Defiant met them with everything they had in the narrow corridors of the ship. Humans and swarm monsters fought at close range. The battle, brutal and bloody. Marcus killed 5 creatures with his sidearm before running out of ammunition, then grabbed a metal pipe and killed 2 more beside him. Valith used her power like a scalpel, targeting individual creatures and stopping their hearts with focused bursts of psychic terror. But there were too many, and one by one, the crew began to fall when the last creature was finally dead. Only 7 humans remained, and the Defiant was barely holding together. Marcus sat in the damaged corridor, his back against the wall, blood dripping from a wound on his forehead. Valith sat beside him, her usual composure broken, her violet eyes filled with grief for the humans who had died protecting her. "Why did they do it?" she whispered. "Why do your people sacrifice themselves so willingly?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "Because we believe that some things are worth dying for," he finally said. "Family, friends, the hope of a better future. We protect what we love, even if it costs us everything." "I have never had anything like that," Velis said. "Nothing worth dying for, nothing worth living for. Until now." She turned to look at him, and Marcus saw something in her eyes that he had never seen before. "Warmth. You gave me that," she said. "You showed me that I could be more than a weapon, that someone could see past my power and find something worth caring about." Marcus reached out and touched her face, his rough fingers gentle against her pale skin. "I did not give you anything," he said. "I just helped you see what was already there." They stayed like that for a long moment, 2 people from different worlds, finding comfort in each other in the darkness between stars. Then Marcus stood and offered her his hand. "Come on. We still have a galaxy to save." Valith took his hand and rose, and together they returned to the bridge. The Nexus was close now. They could feel it, a presence in the void that grew stronger with each passing hour. Whatever waited for them there, they would face it together. And for the first time in her life, Princess Valith Sorn was not afraid. The Nexus creature filled the viewport like a dark moon, its surface covered with pulsing veins and strange, organic structures that seemed to writhe and shift as the Defiant approached. Billions of swarm creatures orbited around it. But something strange was happening. Instead of attacking the human ship, they were pulling back, clearing a path toward the massive being at their center. "It knows we are here," Belith whispered, her violet eyes fixed on the ancient entity. "It is inviting us in." Marcus did not like it. But they had come too far to turn back. Now Defiant landed on the surface of the Nexus creature, its landing struts sinking into flesh that felt like a mixture of meat and metal. "Stay with the ship," Marcus told the 5 surviving crew members. "If we do not return in 3 hours, get out of here and warn the fleet." Then he and Valith stepped out onto the surface of the monster. The air was thick and warm, filled with a smell like rotting flowers, and the ground beneath their feet pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. They walked for what felt like hours, following tunnels that seemed to open before them and close behind them, as if the creature itself was guiding them deeper into its body. Finally, they emerged into a vast chamber at the very center of the Nexus, and there, floating in a pool of glowing liquid, they found the truth. The Nexus creature was not a monster. It was a being, ancient and vast and terribly alone through some form of psychic communication that Valith could barely comprehend. It shared its story with them. It had been born at the dawn of the universe, one of the first conscious beings to emerge from the chaos of creation. And for billions of years, it had drifted through the cosmos, lonely beyond measure. When it finally encountered other life forms, it had tried to communicate, tried to connect, but its attempts had been clumsy and destructive. Its vast mind overwhelming the smaller beings it reached out to in desperation. It had created the swarm, extensions of itself that could interact with the physical world, copies of life forms it had encountered over the millennia. But something had gone wrong. The swarm had grown beyond its control, driven by instincts that the Nexus creature had never intended. And by the time it realized what was happening, it was too late now. It was afraid, surrounded by its own creations that no longer abated, trapped in a cycle of violence that it could not stop. "It is not attacking us," Valith said, her voice filled with wonder. "It is asking for help." Marcus stared at the ancient being, trying to process what they had learned at all this death, all this destruction. And at the center of it was something that just wanted to be understood. "Can you communicate with it?" he asked. Valith closed her eyes and reached out with her power. And for the first time in her life, she did not project fear. Instead, she tried something she had never attempted before. She projected calm. She showed the Nexus creature memories of her own life, her own loneliness, her own desperate wish for connection, and she showed it memories of Marcus, the human who had walked through her terror and seen the person underneath, the man who had taught her that fear did not have to be a weapon, that it could be a bridge. The Nexus creature trembled, its vast form rippling with emotions it had not felt in millennia. Marcus stepped forward, knowing somehow that his words would be carried through Valith's psychic link. "I know what it feels like to be alone," he said. "I know what it feels like to be afraid, to lash out because you do not know any other way. But there is another way." He thought about his own history, about humanity's long and bloody journey from primitive tribes to spacefaring civilization. "My species nearly destroyed itself 100 times over. We fought wars that killed billions. We created weapons that could end all life on our world. But eventually, we learned that our survival depended on working together, on reaching out instead of pushing away." The Nexus creature's attention focused on him, its vast mind touching his small human consciousness. "You have been alone for too long," Marcus continued. "But you do not have to stay that way. The galaxy is full of life, full of beings who are also searching for connection. And if you can learn to reach out gently instead of with overwhelming force, you might find that you are not as alone as you think." For a long moment, Nothing happened, and the Nexus creature made a sound, something between a groan and a song. And throughout the swarm, billions of creatures suddenly stopped moving. They did not attack, they did not retreat, they simply waited, as if listening to a voice only they could hear. The Nexus creature was calling them back, pulling them into itself, absorbing the extensions of its being that had caused so much destruction. It would take time, perhaps years, perhaps decades, but the swarm was ending not through violence, but through understanding. Valith opened her eyes, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. "It says thank you," she whispered. "It says it wants to learn. It wants to find another way." Marcus put his arm around her shoulders, and together they watched as the Nexus creature began its long process of healing. They returned to the Defiant and flew back through swarm space. But now the creatures parted before them, no longer enemies but strange, silent guardians. When they emerged from the darkness and rejoined the coalition fleet, they were met with disbelief and then celebration. The war was over, not through conquest, but through communication. And the galaxy would never be the same. Months later, a second conclave of thrones was held on Etheria. But this time, the mood was very different. The alien kings no longer cowered when Princess Valith entered the chamber, because she was no longer projecting fear. Instead, she walked among them with a calm that she had learned from the Nexus creature, her power finally under her complete control, and beside her, as always, walked Commander Marcus Cole. The Cathari Empire is committed to peaceful communication with the Nexus being, Valith announced to the assembled rulers, and we invite all species to join us in this historic effort. King Vorthan rose from his throne, his four-fingered hands no longer trembling. "The Relax Dominion will stand with you," he declared. And one by one, the other kings added their voices. When the speeches were done and the formal business concluded, Marcus and Valith slipped away to a quiet balcony overlooking the swirling purple nebula. "I never thought this is how it would end," Valith said, her silver hair catching the starlight. "I spent my whole life being afraid of what I was, and it turns out that my power was never the problem. I just needed to learn how to use it differently. Fear is just information," Marcus said, echoing words he had spoken to her long ago. "It tells you something matters. It does not have to make you a monster." Valith turned to face him, her violet eyes softer than he had ever seen them. "You saved me," she said. "Not just on the Nexus, but before that, you saved me from myself." Marcus shook his head. "I did not save you. I just refused to run away." "You saved yourself," she smiled. And it was a real smile, warm and genuine. Nothing like the cold mask she used to wear. "Then let me thank you anyway." She leaned forward and kissed him. And Marcus felt all the fear and pain and loneliness of his life melt away in that moment when they finally pulled apart. Valith laughed, a sound like silver bells. "The alien kings will talk about this for centuries," she said. "The princes who terrified the galaxy, falling in love with a human. Let them talk," Marcus replied. "We have earned a little happiness, far across the stars." The Nexus creature continued its slow work of transformation, learning to reach out to other beings with gentleness instead of force. And on a balcony in Etheria, two people who had both been alone for far too long stood together and watched the stars. The princess who had learned that fear was not her only weapon, and the human warrior who had taught her that courage was just love dressed up for battle. "What happens now?" Valith asked. Marcus took her hand and smiled. "Whatever we want." And together, they walked into a future that was no longer filled with fear, but with hope.